Well, we're moving on. I'm Tom Groenfeld. I do a blog called techandfinance.com and write for a number of financial technology publications in New York and London. We're still expecting Larry Tabb, who's probably the country's most respected capital markets technology analyst. He lives nearby, so he'll probably be coming in just on time. So we're going to take a view from a couple of different practitioners, starting with Jeff Barbeau from M&T Bank. We're asking, what's the biggest innovation coming along that you're working on, and what would you like to see in the industry? How are things going to look in 3 years? And we've got a combination of people here with Ambrish from Sun, who's going to talk about the technologies he sees sweeping in from the third world at times, and sweeping in from the iPhone, and Joe Snido from Standard & Poor's, who's going to talk about platform innovations. So because this is a very complex topic and we've got some real experts here, I'd like to go through their presentations and a little bit of interchange among the three before we go into questions from the audience. So if Jeff will start.
Experts, huh? I'm not sure anyone's an expert on anything, but thank you. First of all, Thornton and Joanne, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. I appreciate that very much, and logistics were wonderful. Also, I learned what my job is by reading my brief this morning. I apologize, that was done by my admin, and my job is perhaps what it said in there, but a little bit more. With that, specifically with that M&T Bank, in running the technology arena for M&T, it is our responsibility to not just keep what's there today running, but effectively and efficiently challenge our cost structures every single day. If anyone's ever had the opportunity to look at the M&T model and how we've done, you would understand that, and you'd gain some enlightenment to our internal requirements of how we have to manage our business. Number two is that in support of that, is how to leverage those technologies and automating the operations internally and externally that we support. So we have to go through that, and we do analysis every single day on that. And as a matter of fact, every technology effort that we do has to go through an NPV analysis. So our technology structure, although as a bank grows over time, as everyone knows, we have to continually challenge ourselves to go back, re-engineer the process, both those decisions that were made 5 years ago because of compliance and regulatory, or even as long as 20 years ago, and make our organization more effective across, from our internal customer to our external customer.
My name is Ambrish. I work for Sun Microsystems. I head up the financial services industry. I've been at Sun 13 years, and I'm actually a technologist by trade. I came to Sun after having spent about 8 years working in a software development firm writing code. And I've done nothing at Sun except for cover financial services. So I actually did something very similar to, I think, what Jeff did over the weekend, which is I took a look at the dictionary to see what is the definition of the word innovation, right? And it was actually quite boring because the first definition said innovation means to innovate. That meant absolutely nothing. So then I took a look at the definition of the word innovate, and all it said was something new. Right? If you've created something new, that's innovation. So I'd like to take that a step further. I actually think it's something new. Maybe, but it needs to have a net kind of positive impact on the audience of that innovation, right? And that's the work that we've been doing at Sun. So financial services is a very, very large industry for Sun. So we do innovation at Sun in two places. The first space, which I consider kind of, running the business, if you will, whereby we build product that actually helps Jeff, with his cost structures, the ability for him to offer new services very quickly to his consumers, etc. And just to give you an example in that space, storage has been spoken about quite a bit over the last few hours. It's a very mundane topic, right? I mean, you write data, and the best thing that can happen is that you read it back and you get what you wrote, right? That's the exciting part about storage. So it's actually quite boring. But there is innovation that's actually happened in this space. The best thing that's happened inside of Sun, I believe, at least in the last 1.5 to 2 years, is the work that we've done inside of storage. So storage, if you just think about this for 1 second, everybody knows about this Moore's law curve, right? That essentially the capacity of what you can do on a CPU tends to to double every 18 to 24 months. Nothing can keep up with the CPU speeds, right? Storage can absolutely not keep up with the CPU speeds. And in fact, if storage had followed the Moore's law curve, we would have disks that are spinning at 200,000 RPM. Talk about environmental impact and things like that. So the work that we've done in the last 6 months essentially is taking off-the-shelf components, putting some very smart software around it, et cetera, and make things just run a lot faster than they would have 6 months prior to releasing this product. So that's the mundane stuff that we work on. But the fun stuff, the stuff that I actually, really like, is taking all of the technologies that Sun makes and then working with a lot of partners globally and putting together these stacks of innovation, right, that we take out to our customers. As an example, we've done a tremendous amount of work in sub-Saharan Africa, where we've worked with Vodafone and Citigroup. So Citigroup's kind of white labeled some of their remittance products, and we are using cell phones as devices for people to send remittances back to their countries, right? For me, as a migrant worker, if I leave my home country and go to a first world country and I work, I want to send money back to my parents, to my family on a daily or a weekly basis. And the only way I can do it today, really, is using Western Union, right? Because they are ubiquitous, right? You actually do tend to find Western Union branches. But even there, because it's a brick and mortar operation, it gets tougher and tougher. Yeah, Western Union has branches that they have in grocery stores, they have certain branches in post offices, but wouldn't it be fantastic if I came home at the end of the day and I pressed a button on my cell phone and the money showed up on my mom's cell phone? Because guess what? My mom might be sitting in a village. She might not have, electricity 24 hours a day. There might not be clean water. She has a cell phone, right? All of us thought, 5 years ago that the internet would be something that would change the planet. I contend it's the mobile device that's actually going to change this planet. So what we've done is essentially worked with a ton of financial services firms. This is what I call innovation, right? And we are offering them the ability to offer their services to a set of customers that were never their customers, and they could never reach their customers using the traditional channels that they have. Right, the most exciting channel in the banking space is the internet. But guess what? These people don't have access to a PC where they can actually go and do internet banking with you. So we'll get back to a lot more of this. But just so what I'm hoping to see happen in 3 years is just see this 97% of the population of the world, which is completely unbanked, untouched, to actually move up a level. Right, for us to be able to offer them a micro loan of $100 and change their lives for better, right? So just have society kind of move up one notch.
Hi, I'm Joe Snyder. I work for Standard & Poor's, and up to probably a year ago I would have said I work for a boring industry also. And I actually think it was a little better when it was boring. Before S&P, actually I worked for Moody's too, so it was about 14 years there before my last 3 or 4 years at Standard & Poor's. And one of the things that I've seen, and this is where we talk about like innovation, and I've seen the same kind of innovation within the IT industry, where IT was an art, right? Everybody did it as an artist, and people didn't really want to do things in standardized, procedural kind of ways. And I've seen the ratings businesses change over time, so where the innovation actually is ways to kind of standardize white-collar work as to how you do things, how you do analysis, how you share information, those kinds of things. And I think Larry is here, right? Is this Larry?
Yes,
yeah.
Larry.
So this is the rest of our panel.
Sorry about that.
Rounding in.
No, financial services is real time. How did he know? He was jamming. How did he know?
He wanted to make a dramatic entrance, I think.
Fine, you're 2 minutes early.
Oh, yeah, we're running ahead of schedule. So there's a lot of similarities that I see happening in the ratings business that already happened within the IT business, and the same kind of changes. People don't really want their businesses to be standardized. They don't want standard processes. So in linking to innovation, which is our topic of conversation here, I think in terms of platforms. We have an outside need for change, and we can see our analysts are changing how they do work. And we need to build the platforms that help facilitate that change. And so from an IT business, we kind of drive things from the platform. And one of the analogies when we were talking in our smaller group as to an interesting platform for change, we talked about the iPhone. The iPhone is a platform, effectively, from our perspective, and then there's software that's built on that, and tremendous change is being driven from that really relatively simple platform. And I think a lot of that can be driven from IT also, and I think we'll get into that into our conversation.
Larry, we're just talking about the key innovations in the industry as you see them and what difference they're going to make and how this might look in 3 years. How's your crystal ball?
The financial markets and I focus a lot on the capital market side of the business and the securities markets, and these markets are about as innovative as I've ever seen. I've been an industry analyst now for 12, 13 years, and it seems like every 2 or 3 years we totally reinvent ourselves. If we go back, it was the internet, then it was Y2K, having to fix our back-end platforms, then it was the whole crisis or dot-com bubble and so forth, and now we're in a whole mode where latency is absolutely critical, especially on the trading side, and we're talking about people are fighting not over seconds but over milliseconds and microseconds, and right now actually there's a whole series of congressional hearings going on advanced trading technologies and trying to figure out are these advances good or not. So I think the issue is, as technology continues to progress and as technology gets cheaper, faster, there'll be all sorts of creative people trying to rethink how we do business. And to a certain extent, it's absolutely true in that if you look at commodity products, and basically financial services are pretty much all commodity products. We've been managing money and moving money around forever. The issue is, if you're competing in a space where everything is a commodity, how do you get a premium product out of it? How do you charge more for it? And then the issue will be is trying to differentiate it. Try to make your commodity product seem like it's different than his commodity product or the other commodity product. And to a certain extent, that's what we're doing. We are shaving a corner here, we're turning it a little sideways, we're flipping it around, we're changing the colors, we're delivering it on an iPhone, we're delivering it ubiquitously, we're speeding it up, we're slowing it down. We're all doing these little tiny things to make mine look better than the next guy. And no matter what happens, no matter where we go, because the amount of money is so huge behind us, there will always be people vying to have, the next coolest gadget, spin this, a little bit sideways and call it something else. It'll be an area of tremendous innovation across virtually every aspect.
Jeff, Ambrish promised to make your life cheaper and easier by helping you get more effective infrastructure, and then he waves an iPhone at you and says he wants to bank over his iPhone. So he's going to take away the simplicity by burdening you with another channel right away. How do you manage your existing infrastructure to reduce that maintenance? The typical is 80% maintenance, 20% innovation. How do you manage your infrastructure to be able to support this guy coming around with this new toy?
I wish it was only Ambrish doing that to me. But before I answer that, I have to deviate for 1 second, because Thornton's been picking on a lot of people. Has he not, all day? Show people your socks. Come on. So how nicely color coordinated you are.
If things get slow, you wear the panel socks.
And they match the color of their shirt. Nice going. We like that. Well, as I said, I wish it was just Ambrish. Like all of us, we have many sources coming after us. And every customer and new customer that sees something different on their desk, or their friends have it or whatever, they determine, why isn't your bank offering this? Why can't we do something with this? And when you talk about, let's go to the mobile phone. Bank of America was out there for quite some time and working through their process and have somewhere around 2 million customers on their product, which is very admirable. At the same time, they invested considerable amount of money to be there without truly a differentiator yet. 90% of the transactions are balance inquiry. Now, you folks being on a campus, when individuals and college kids used to go to the ATM, the very first transaction they did was a balance inquiry. Even before they took out the $5 or $10, because that's the average withdrawal at a campus was $10. That's why some banks changed the ATMs and so on in order to increase that. And we changed the methodology to just create the balance inquiry or the balance on your receipts and so on. But anyway, it is a gadget right now. And there's more processes, and as Larry will probably go to on the commercial side, there's more use to it from BlackBerry. But on our side, you have to go two ways. The very first thing is that, is it an early adapter? Is it where 10% of your customers just want to see it, play with it, and understand it, but what is it really going to mean? So how much money do you want to allocate into something initially to determine its benefit for the organization long term? And/or you look at it and you say, okay, we'll build it initially, and this is how we'll do it, and interfacing with whatever we have to, but long term, here's how we'll migrate. And leveraging what information from the Sun Microsystems and so on provide us, they give us the tools in order to do that more simply than for us developing all the solutions internally. The key is creating the underpinnings that allow us to retain the infrastructure as stable as possible.
And I think a lot of this depends on the customer segment that you're actually chasing after, right? In Japan, I was actually at a conference at Cybos in Hong Kong a few weeks ago, and we got to see a case study of a firm that's built a brand new bank. And the only channel that they offer for that entire bank is the mobile device, right? Because they're going after the Japanese consumer that is actually very, very savvy with their mobile devices. The network supports it, the kind of data that actually flows back and forth. I mean, the iPhone's been a great boon for AT&T, but for those of you who have iPhones or are on AT&T, you've seen the actual, performance of the network drop dramatically as more and more iPhones actually get placed. That's not an issue at the moment, at least in Japan. So it depends purely after the segment that you're going after. If your segment is not interested, if it's not keen on doing mobile banking, and if all they want to do is balance inquiry, then absolutely the work that Bank of America and some of these other banks are doing with a ton of other things, offering a ton of other services on their mobile devices are completely useless. They will never be able to recoup their cost. But Bank of America, being a global entity, is actually doing this because it's not just the United States market that they're going after, right? They are actually going after, again, that 95% of the customer base, of the potential customer base, right? So it's a good thing that they'll be able to offer, mobile banking to some of these people. But the fantastic thing is that they'll also make a lot of money off of this, right? This is not just, a benefit to society. They're not doing this because they're good guys. They're doing this because it's a really, really profitable business to also be in. And as regards, for large banks, the existing applications that they have, that's kind of their number one expense, right? And there are bankers in this room, and I hope you won't disagree with this, but I would contend that 60 to 70% of your budgets are spent, perhaps even more, 80% of your budgets are just spent maintaining what you have today, right? The innovation or the new services, et cetera, that come out are the 20%, which, by the way, in the last couple of years has actually declined even more. So the work that we do, right, some of the innovative stuff that we do inside of Sun to actually help you with that 80% of the cost, as an example, is, look, you've got an application that is supporting 100,000 transactions per minute at the moment, right? Your customer base hopefully increases. You now want to support 200,000 transactions per minute. But the application hasn't been touched in the past 10 years, in the past 15 years. You're scared of actually moving the application, right? So, we help you create this application capsule, which can actually very easily migrate from the older platform that you have to the newer platform that you have. The application still thinks it's running on the older platform, but guess what? It just runs better, faster, cheaper, so on and so forth, right? So I consider that to be, again, running the bank as opposed to, enhancing the creativity of the bank. But all of those technologies exist, absolutely.
In some ways, I absolutely agree. But in other ways, you have to be really careful. As I said, I've been doing this now 12, 13 years as an industry analyst. I started in 1996. 1997 came the big internet boom. And folks like Fidelity, there's a gentleman named who's still there, Joe Farah, was chief wireless officer back in, I want to say, 1998, and they developed their first wireless applications on platforms that we really wouldn't even consider having in our house anymore, except maybe as a doorstop. And so the question becomes is, now if they made significant investments in that platform a decade ago, when wireless trading was just, did they make money on that? I would venture to say not. Now, and it's only coming upon now when you've got the iPhone, you have new BlackBerry versions, you have a much more robust internet, we have 3G. Now those investments are probably worthwhile. 10, 11 years ago, I'm not sure, except, just for the coolness factor and to say, hey, look, we're with it, we have a wireless channel even though 3 people are using it. The question is, where do you want to, invest, and when do you want to invest, and where on that curve do you want to be? Certainly, Fidelity, E-Trade, Schwab, the guys who made those, at least on the security side, made those investments in the late 90s. They used it actually more probably as a marketing tool to say, we're cool, we're with it. If you want to be cool and with it, you need to market with us. But as a technology platform, they got way more transactions off the web and way, and off traditional internet platform than they ever got off a cell phone. So we need to, when you're looking at innovative technologies and you're looking at making significant investments, you need to understand what's doable, what's your market like, or if you invest money now, will it be worthwhile? What are you going to get back out of it? How are you going to spin it? Is this more marketing than real? And you need to put all that in context.
But I think one of the things that you also, going to the flip side of that is you also can't get to a stage as a financial services firm where you're actually forced to spend money on something that has already been commoditized, right? That's the worst thing that can happen to you, right? Another 2-3 years down the road, the mobile banking platform is going to be ubiquitous, right? You do not want to be a bank that actually doesn't offer that platform because your customers expect that. If 90% of the banks offer that particular platform and you don't, then your customers will leave you, right? So, and at that point, if you actually have to do development on that, it's not an innovative thing for you anymore. Now it's a commodity that you actually have to invest in, and that's just terrible.
Well, that's exactly right. You need to know where on the curve you want to be, and some people are very happy to be way out on the curve, and some people want to be a little bit further in.
Do you want to talk a little bit about how you're combining technology with pricing and service to differentiate the bank from competition?
I can do that. I want to go back to the maintenance comment. If you take out infrastructure expenses, which are dealing with the routers, those heavily electrical utilization components, but if you take out the infrastructural piece at M&T, we're 60-40, 55-45. We're right in that neighborhood from development versus just maintaining those applications, and that includes maintenance expenses. There was a comment made earlier with respect to the large vendor providers, the large providers and where they're going and so on. And in our environment within M&T Bank, it's an alliance with the right organizations that really makes us or provides us the opportunity to be successful and manage our day-to-day operational expenses as cheaply as we do. It is an alliance. But to your where you were going, Thomas, every bank has challenges, and the market conditions the way they are, put that aside for one moment, but it's really understanding the customer base. Unlike newer organizations forming, they're forming with a business model and attracting customers that support that business model. Organizations that have been around in existence for a while have a myriad of customer requirements and demands within that portfolio. Of our customer base, we have some that are active internet users, we have some that are not. We have some that we can move towards that, some we cannot. We offer a mobile phone. The adoption rate has been very small, or very slight so far, but for many reasons. And a lot of it is the demographics of the customer base you have. So what Thomas is inferring is that with, again, like all organizations, it's coming down to how we mine into that customer information, how we understand the characteristics of the customer, their desire to do certain transactions, and even their family and what their families are doing and so on. Back when I was younger, the average cost in order to obtain a new customer was 3 times more than to retain. it's now closer to 7 times more to obtain than it is to retain. That's an incredible number. So it is about knowing your customers and knowing what they need. So what we're trying to do, again, like most organizations, and we believe based on our size and some other attributes that we have technologically, that we will be nimble enough to truly understand and bundle products and services whereby we can offer flex offers so that a 70-year-old person is not being charged for a statement because they don't want to be an internet user. And that's going to be the real key for an organization such as ourselves. Acquisitions aside, again, if you have the opportunity to look at M&T on the website, we've been very successful through the acquisition route. But the real key is the retention of the households that we have garnered and obtained through those acquisitions, and we've been very successful. And it is due to the fact of where we're going.
Joe, do you want to talk a little bit about customer retention and who your customers are and what you're going to have to be doing in terms of data management going forward?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about the customer retention piece, and also I just wanted to talk a little bit about, Jeff is supporting many different types of customers. I think, I see, in addition to that, there's a lot of directions we get pulled in that we don't even, the business can turn on pretty much in a right turn and be in a totally different direction a year from now. So we kind of lay our bets out as to what the technologies would be, whether they're cell phones or other type platforms. But we have to support all of those things potentially, right? So we have to architect to support all of these multiple distribution channels. My customers are primarily people who consume information about ratings. And, a lot of the value in the ratings is the more broadly the information gets distributed, the more valuable it is. There's a certain amount of demand pull to that. So we also have a strategy for multiple distribution channels, whether it's PDA devices, web, syndicating data out, in addition to all of our opinions. So those are all very important to us. Increasingly, the two-way communication channels are becoming important, and people need to give us feedback on position papers we put out, criteria we're discussing, and it's hard to have a conversation with the entire planet. But that's what it feels like in a way when you're a rating agent, a global rating agency, right? And anything that you do is held up to scrutiny, and you want to collect that feedback, and you need to, interface with government regulators and all the other stuff. So we're putting technologies in place that help us do that. Also, technologies that help support that dialogue in general. I don't know.
Larry, can you just give us an update on the cutting-edge technology in trading these days? I kind of have a hard time keeping track of how many prices are hitting the engines per second and what the latency is on a trade round trip.
Right now, the fastest exchange is matching orders at 350 microseconds, and they're moving. The New York Stock Exchange developed a new platform in Europe called UTP, which is supposedly rated at 150 microseconds. Now it goes microseconds. Microseconds is 1,000 milliseconds, which is 1,000th of a second. So you're dealing with a very short period of time, and we're up to something like, I think the peak 1 minute number of messages in the U.S. Financial markets, which include equities, options, and I'm not sure if futures are included or not, but it's somewhere up at around 1,700,000 messages per second peak. And so what's happening now, there are these groups of folks that are basically building tick engines to read every single one of those messages, determine what it means, and make a trading decision based upon what's happening in the market, filtering through those million-plus messages every second. And so the infrastructure to do this becomes very, very selective. So you can't read that much data that quickly. So it quickly gets filtered down to, okay, what am I looking at? What products am I looking at? What opportunities am I looking at? And then basically filtering down a lot of that information. Then you've got a whole lot of analysis engines in the back looking for these opportunities. Generally, they're called CEP engines, complex event processing platforms that look through these massive amounts of data. And then you've got trading engines that are built on top of it that can very quickly buy and sell depending upon what's happening in the marketplace. And then what you've got is that depending upon what you're trying to accomplish, you may be co-located within an exchange, which basically means you're in the same data center as the exchange. So and we're dealing with the reason why they're co-located with the exchange is because of the physics of the speed of light. The speed of light only goes so fast. So the further you are away from the exchange, the slower it is for you to get your orders into the marketplace. So we've gone from a point in time where trading used to be done around the buttonwood tree, which was the, I think it was a sycamore tree down in lower Manhattan where everybody used to stand, to the creation of a delivery zone, which was south of Canal, so the people could deliver securities within a walkable area, to the electronification of the market, and people kind of moved all over again, all over the place. And now they're all coming back to being in the same data center because, proximity has an advantage if you're looking to try and be the first one. And so there are a whole host of infrastructure around, reading market data, analyzing it, moving that data, normalizing all the data, making a decision, trading it, getting the acknowledgement back from the exchange, and then updating your risk and understanding it. So it's a whole host of infrastructure that folks are developing, which is pretty cool. But it's really out there in terms of technology.
Just to put a monetary perspective on this, the figure that was quoted 2 years ago, right, and obviously this has changed significantly since, the figure that was quoted was every millisecond advantage that you have over your competitor gives you the potential to be able to make $1 million more, right? 1 millisecond equates to $1 million. So those were the numbers that we were looking at 2 years ago. So the work that my team that works in the low latency space does, like Larry said, we are dealing with customers that want to get down to, double-digit microsecond latencies, right? Because their competitors are already sitting at 200, 250 second microseconds. So what can we do to actually get you to 90 microseconds and 80 microseconds, right? So it's just insane at the moment.
Larry Scott asked during a conversation earlier whether all innovation is good. Should I throw that out to the panel? Is all innovation good, or are there ways it should be channeled better than it is?
Well, one of the big things that's happening in Congress right now, this week, last week, is that they're really looking very meticulously at a lot of these quote-unquote innovations and trying to understand, are you, me, and everybody else at a disadvantage because of all these guys that are trading at light speed? Our thoughts are generally not, but the SEC and the actual legislators are looking into this and trying to make a decision. Now, they come up with the answer is no. Does that mean they take away all our computers, or do they stop? They put speed bumps in the way? I'm not sure what the right answer is, but they're trying to figure this out. So,
why would we not be at a disadvantage?
Well, the reason why you're not at a disadvantage is because generally investors, people who are looking to hold product longer than a couple of seconds, are not in the business of buying and selling in millisecond-based time increments. So, our goal as an individual investor typically is to buy something and hold it for longer than a minute. Hopefully, average holding times are really 6 months to a couple of years. So in that case, you would have no ability to take advantage of that time increment. Now, the other side of that is that the way the market works is that there are basically 3 different market mechanisms at work when you buy stock. There's the investor, that's you or Fidelity or Putnam or Scudder or whoever. There's a market maker or an intermediary that basically they provide most of the quotes in the market. So when you see what the best bid, best offer is, most of the time that's a market maker. And then you have an exchange or a matching engine that's matching buyers and sellers. And so what's happening is that the competition isn't necessarily at the investor's point, it's in the market maker place. And what's happening are these high frequency guys are actually displacing many of the traditional market makers and making that process more efficient, which in effect means that they're trying to compete against other high frequency market makers, increasing the bids and offers in the market and tightening the spreads, which then helps you get a better price. That's a long-winded answer to basically say that generally this is in an individual's better interest, but That's my perspective. Apparently other folks look at it differently.
So this isn't accounting for wide swings in volatility. This is
narrowing spreads. Okay. This is narrowing the bid-ask spreads.
Mm-hmm. Bill, question?
Yeah, devil's advocate, it seems like what you're talking about in terms of innovation is focused on, if you break financial services into the investment side and risk-taking side and the administrative side. You're really talking about a lot of innovation around the administrative side. And what's interesting about, for example, the example you brought up is if you increase the speed, the velocity of trading, you can increase the total amount that is traded in a period of time. And because we measure people and we measure fraud, in fact, as a percentage of volume, not as absolute dollars. Like the admin ratio keeps going down, then things are going down. But what's also happening at the same time, it seems like, and you can see that from 1,000 feet away, 1,000 miles away, is that there's greater opportunity for corruption if that's the only thing you're trying to do is to accelerate trading. And I'm wondering if at the same time, there's that old Bank of America ad that says, we don't want to process a million checks, we want to process one check exactly right a million times. Is there a countervailing force, or should there be, in terms of not just velocity, but quality, that would really ensure a level of integrity in financial services that's at risk for the public?
That's a really good question. And as we drive towards, smaller and smaller latencies, it gets harder and harder to measure. Also, what's happening in the market is that the exchanges are fragmenting. It used to be New York stocks were traded on the New York, and over-the-counter stocks were traded through NASDAQ. Now there are 50 places to get equities executed. And so, if you knew that you were top of book at New York, basically the best price in New York, there's a good chance, well, actually New York's a bad example because they trade through you all day long. Mm-hmm. But if you were top of book on NASDAQ, you would more likely get executed. Now the problem is there are so many tops of books, and how do you know whether you're getting executed? That's your question, and whether you're being manipulated. On the other hand, spreads, stock spreads have come down from quarters to eighths to sixteenths to 30 seconds to now pennies. So they've come down from 25 cents to 12 and a half cents to 8 and a quarter cents, basically to 6 and a quarter cents to now pennies. And so with a lot of the high frequency things that are going on, especially if you're not a large investor and trying to buy 1 million shares or 500,000 shares of stock, the spread, even if you are getting ripped off, it's only for a couple of pennies here and there, which is typically better than what was happening on every single transaction that was occurring 3 or 5 years ago.
That's actually
and the problem is also what's supposed to happen under Reg NMS, which is the market governance that we're supposed to be running under, is that every single transaction across all of those 50 entities are supposed to execute at or better than the best bid, best offer in the marketplace. So every time there's an execution, the broker's supposed to snap the market, display the best bid, best offer, display the execution, and the execution better be at or better than the best bid, best offer. Now, with everything moving in milliseconds, conceivably, are the machines fast enough to be able to do that? I'm not sure what the answer to that is. But the SEC is supposed to be looking at it. The SEC has to have all the tools and money to do all that stuff. It's kind of doubtful, but that's what's supposed to be happening.
So technology is being used in market surveillance, like APAMA systems in Turquoise and LSE and systems here as well. And in retail banking, know your customer, anti-money laundering. You want to just explain what you have to do, your technology investments just to keep afloat?
Well, yeah. first, going back even to what banks and so on are going to look like in the next 3 years or whatever, most organizations create roadmaps, and we like all of those. We do that as well because it's about providing customer self-service. The more and more automation and tools that you can provide to allow the customer to fulfill the transactions they want to accomplish, the better off we all will be, and the sustainable model that will create. And that's what we are moving towards. And with that, it comes down to knowing your customer. The legal components of that put aside for one moment, and what the regulatories are for understanding your customer transactions and so on, it comes down to the tools and the accessibility into understanding your customer, understanding what their typical transactional sets are, but also being able to manage the risk that customer provides you or pushes you towards. So they're going back to an even simpler side than from the securities, but even on a loan approval and so on, is not just the credit scorecards that everybody goes through, but it's also the complete product portfolio that customer has and what risks you are or not willing to take. But you need to make it so that it's something that's auditable and is highly regulated so that there's not suspicion of crossing any line in there, to your point, Bill. So.
And you have to make sure that you're not accused of racial profile and things like that along the way too, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Joe, can you and Ambrish talk a little bit about how you design an IT architecture for changes you can't predict? How do you design for agility? Because you said you're expecting S&P to take a right-hand turn someplace.
You can probably go deeper than I can. Well, maybe I should start off, and then you could fill in all the missing pieces. But it's pretty much kind of layering complexity to a large degree. Making sure that the organization, even when you talk about data layers, we're linking all of our information across the institution, that we're building services that we can kind of share so that we build it one time and then it's used throughout the organization, and then we piece it together in ways that, we say, at the end of a long process where you're building systems, it looks very brilliant when you built this system, but it was a series of small decisions that led to what looks like a very intelligent system. And the complexity comes out of just working with people and putting it together in ways that make sense from a business perspective. And so we're trying to do it very much in component pieces and in component architecture. Software, just kind of, it's more than layered. It's designed, it's almost like a social function within the organization as to how you kind of reach in and understand the different needs of those services. It's becoming a highly complex social activity from what I can see, and over time less about technology and more about those social networks we create within our organization. But you can talk about the other pieces.
So, yeah. I actually think the problem exists in software, right? Us hardware manufacturers try and patch things up, and I'll talk about how we've done this successfully over the past decade or so. But the basic problem actually exists in the software. The hardware manufacturers, whether it's Sun, whether it's IBM, whether it's Intel, whether it's AMD, we've been really, really good at providing very large-scale hardware, right? But the question has always been, if I give you one CPU, say your application runs in a minute. If I give you two, will your application run in 30 seconds? What happens if I give you 4? What happens if I give you 4,000 CPUs, right? Do you actually have applications that will scale to that extent? And the answer emphatically is, right, depending upon which software manufacturer you speak with, you get to a certain point, and then after that, no, it will not scale anymore. In fact, then the performance starts to degrade if you give them more CPUs, right? So that's a problem that we've been trying to solve inside of Sun for a long time, and that's a software development problem, right? You have to actually take a massive step back. And one of the things, I was at a conference in London a couple months ago. It was a conference done by a company called 29 West, which is a very fast provider of messaging infrastructure. And Intel was on the panel, and one of the things I told the Intel guy was, you guys have actually set the industry, the software industry, back another 5 years. And they just announced their Nehalem CPUs, right? The next best thing since sliced bread. Why? Because they've actually made crap software run better and faster for another 5 years, right? We reached a stage in the compute industry where every single CPU could not perform better individually. So what all the CPU manufacturers were doing was breaking the CPUs up and giving you more smaller CPUs, right? So you have to think about how you write software for this stuff now, right? But with the Nehalems, everybody just sits back and says, oh, pew. The crap software that I wrote 5 years ago is actually going to run twice as fast, so I don't have to do anything in this space, right? So that's what the hardware guys are doing. In the Sun space, what we've done is we've built platforms that have the ability, based on the way the workload is hitting the servers or the storage, of swinging in more resources dynamically, right? So if the market peaks, if there's a triple witching hour that actually you haven't planned for, and all of a sudden the transaction rates go up, we have the ability inside of software to actually go steal computing cycles from places where they might not be used and make it available to your application on the fly, right? So the application just thinks that, oh, all of a sudden I have more resources that I'm running on. And if the application's well written, right, then it hopefully actually scales up and takes advantage of that, right? But this is truly a software development problem.
Tom, you said, is there a downside a little bit ago of innovation? And Embrecht, you're talking about economies of scale, basically, that it costs $1 billion, more than billions of dollars, to put out a new chip, so you better do it right the first time. Software, unfortunately, isn't like that. Anybody, as Embrecht said, you can put out any software you want. But if you look at the innovation cycle in banks, or at least in the investment side, the investment goes to the guy who's going to make the next $1 billion. And so, I stand up and said, I got the next best thing. I'm going to make the firm $1 billion. And they say, okay, here's a lot of money. Go build something. I go get a team of programmers. They build something, and hopefully I make a lot of money. But when those programmers come back into the pool, the question is, are they going to spend the time to integrate it in with everything else? Are they going to build it in the exact same standards? And if I'm, going to be, if I have a short window of opportunity to make my $1 billion, I'm going to beat my programmers up to get it done as fast as I possibly can, because I want to tap into that right now. Then what happens is, what happens next? Do those guys, once they build the product, they get the time to go back, oh, let's re-engineer this thing and build it to corporate standards and integrate it in and make it all wonderful and integrate with everything? No, they go to the next guy who's going to make $1 billion. And so what winds up happening is, you have all these islands of innovation that go off in all these different directions for people who have these great products that are going to wind up making billions of dollars. And then when the time comes, the question is, are you going to rewrite all these things back to a central core platform, and are you going to straighten out all your infrastructure and rebuild your architecture? And the answer is usually, yeah, we really want to do that, and we'll get to it, and the next $1 billion project comes up and all my resources are pulled off. And so the downside of innovation is that it's very hard to build everything back into a central core. The plus side of innovation, I guess, is that you have the opportunity to take advantage of all these different opportunities by getting a core group of people out to do something really interesting. And if your company is dynamic, you wind up doing it. But then on the other hand, you have a headache, you're gluing it all back together at the end.
And I think we're about to hear this never happens at Standard & Poor's, that there are no silos of information there at all.
No, you're going to hear that I can relate, actually. That I can relate very much to that issue. One of the things that I've seen is that innovation is driven very often in silos. And that's where we've been trying to change the behavior within our organization by building on more of a standardized platforms. And when I was asked the question, how has this helped Standard & Poor's? One of the ways that it's helped Standard & Poor's, a platform and a technology, was to digitize the work that the analysts do. Because once something's in digital form, it's much easier to change direction, and that's what I can see now that we're entering a compliance environment, those types of things. Once it's in digital form, you can say, I can go in this new direction, but only if you build it as a platform. Now that we're getting a lot more interaction with regulators at this point in time, very often we get deadlines. This has to be done in 3 months. This has to be done in 2 months. And then we get into that challenge. Well, how do we build it the right way based on the time frames that we have? And what we do now is we actually build a budget, and we say we've incurred a technology debt here, so we're meeting our deadline, whether that's for innovation or it's for compliance, and then we build the budget to fix it. But you have to catch that right at the beginning. If you don't do it at the beginning, forget about trying to get the money later on. You have to say, when we take shortcuts, we fund it right from the beginning.
So I have a question for you. There was a joke going around a while back. What's the difference between Iceland and Ireland?
Oh.
The letter C. I'm going to look at each of you guys as an originator, an enabler, an evaluator, and an historian. Starting from Jeff as the originator, Ambrish as the enabler, Joe as the evaluator, and then Larry as the historian. Let's assume that you four guys have been marched up in front of the Prime Minister of Iceland or wherever, and they're not very happy campers. How do you respond to, wow, innovation in financial services is a really good thing? Because needless to say, Iceland and even Ireland is not necessarily a great place to be these days.
Am I the originator of the solution or the originator of now compounding the issue you just brought up?
I'll let you interpret however you like.
Somehow this isn't very fair. Since I'm familiar with AIB, I'm not. I have to stay away from that one. All right. So, how is technology is in despair, or how do I approach that within your Ireland comment?
Well, I think look at innovation, and then if you as an originator, for example, of mortgage loans, were in effect some part of the value chain that created the individual phenomenon that today is, confronting Iceland or Ireland. How do you respond to the people who no longer have, say, money because their public treasury is us?
This is the first time I should say that I'm the technician and I'm in the background, so I'm not out in the front. So I don't necessarily have to answer that question. However, there is no easy way to ever tell anyone that their house or whatever and that they're out of money. That's not the easy solution. The solution approaches in that scenario is, first of all, if you think about, picking on your example of Ireland and the 4.5 million people that live there and so on, there's an issue just with respect to their opportunity to be successful, any financial institution within Ireland. Number two is, believe it or not, they are highly regulated, much more even than we are in New York State, much more. They also have compelling issues with regard to their government involvement with some of their components. So technologically, the only thing that clearly that I feel that I could say is that we need to make sure that our products and services, back to a comment that Bill made earlier, that how do you know that things aren't fraudulently done? How do you know that originators and servicers aren't doing something that they shouldn't be doing, or they're incented to create more mortgages versus the right mortgages and so on? So the only thing you could ever do on something like that as a financial institution, as an originator, is try to show and demonstrate really the products and services that you have, and really the regulation that you have in your own internal organization, the audits and so on that you go through, and the exams you go through. And I guess additionally, with looking at that, is you always have to demonstrate a level of consistency. You have to design and demonstrate and illustrate to those that come in and look at your books and want to understand what you're doing, that level of consistency across the organization and how those decisions are made. So as an enabler, my objective would have to be make sure that I have the proper technologies in place, the ability that if overrides are done for decisions or whatever, that I have an audit trail associated with that to who conducted that and why they conducted it. Thirdly, economical impacts to that. How did that influence that model and or those decisional processes that were done? Fourthly, if decisions were made across in this case, the country, that had an influence, positive or negative, what did that mean to the outcome of my technology and what it was showing the CEO that was required to answer those questions?
This kind of goes back to the root of this crisis, right, where it actually began. And I contend that the problem was not with the institutions that actually created the products that actually caused this problem. I contend that the problem was with the input that was actually given into these products. These products have existed before, right? The fact that loans were made, subprime loans were made to pretty much anyone, who had the ability to hold a pen and sign, that's where kind of the root of the problem is. And I will absolutely agree with the fact that there needed to be enough scrutiny in the system that this stuff should have been caught. right? And I think we are learning from this mistake that was made, and there is enough regulation that will be in place. Sadly, the pendulum is going to swing all the way to the other side, right, before it actually comes back to the middle again, where it should have been in the first place. But blaming this on the capital markets industry, I believe, is a massive flaw. Look, the capital markets industry has existed since day one. I mean, the reason it's called the capital markets industry is because it's existed to create capital, right? When I want to create a company, I can only do two things if I need money to actually create that company. I can go and borrow money, which is the debt market. I can issue a bond, or I can go into the securities market and create equities, right? The primary market that I have. All of this work that was done in the secondary markets. And the secondary markets exist to essentially create enough liquidity so people are interested in going and buying debt from IBM or Oracle or Sun, right? And if that market did not exist, growth would be absolutely stifled, right? Completely stifled. So the markets have existed, the products have been created to actually create more liquidity into the marketplace. The fact that there was absolute garbage that came into these particular products and it was not caught in the three places where it should have been caught is a mistake, but I don't believe that's a mistake of the actual product that was created. And for any country, by the way, to be a country, I'm not talking about a firm, any country to actually be exposed to such an extent to any one such product, I actually blame the regulators of that country for this, right? How can you actually blame the financial system to have, no system on the planet should have the ability to actually bring an entire country down. A country should have, the regulators in that country should have the ability to hedge their bets against any of these failures. And the fact that they didn't do that is just, that's their mistake. That was a flaw. And I betcha they've learned their lesson. And this will never happen again in Iceland or Ireland for that matter.
I should be evaluating their answers.
Yes, please.
I think. Well, first of all, I think the observation around risk management, which is really the case, especially in the case of Ireland and Iceland, I don't think they did a very good job of risk management. I 100% agree with that assessment. How could you base your economy, 80, 90% of your economy, actually probably 200 to 300% of your economy? That was the problem in Iceland. They were betting their economy many times over on one particular model. So it's a risk management issue. I think that's pretty key to it, and I think that's a really good observation. Though it is kind of blaming the victim, right? In some degree, yes. And I don't know how to give a sympathetic answer, from the perspective of how could they have known, what could they have done differently to have prevented this? Otherwise I'll be joining in the solution too. But I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I will. I think there's more than plenty of blame to go all around. I think you need to go back to the elemental issues that we've created. We're lending money to people who don't have the ability to pay it back. We're creating products that are obfuscating the real risks. Where unfortunately credit rating agencies stamp these things as AAA, and they probably shouldn't have been rated as AAA. We have investment banks that are making, we have a flat yield curve, so that the only way, which basically means long and short-term interest rates are roughly the same. And so the only way to really, get any type of yield on your investments is with overwhelming leverage, as well as lending money to people who can't pay it back, so that you can get a credit spread instead of generally a time spread. You've got investment banks then, making significant revenues on turning this over. You've got the government that really says everybody should own a house, and banks figure out a way how to, absorb the risk. And you got people who are, taking out loans for way much more money than they can ever realistically pay it back. And so you've got fault across the board. From everyone sitting in the room, to all the regulators, to all the banks, to all the investors who bought this crap, to the credit rating agencies who stamped it AAA, to everyone. So we need to go back to basics. We need to be able to say, we're lending money to people who can afford to pay it back. The structures that we're, using to lend money that are not onerous and won't put the lenders or the borrowers in bankruptcy. That the credit rating agencies know what they're rating and they rate them properly. That the banks don't, use 40 times leverage to amp up their returns. The problem is that there's no one simple answer. And in reality, this will happen again. We are not out of it because, in effect, the way we've solved this problem is by making banks that were too big to fail even bigger. And so I'm not sure until we break them down into smaller component pieces. I'm not sure how we're out of this thing. We've just covered it up.
Larry asked a great question. I mean, is this a case of innovators gone wild, or like, I think you're leading. Yeah, and also, but the real question, I think, moving forward is, does this, because this innovation, for all the systemic reasons, and blame is around and all that other type of stuff, but does this sort of reduce the impetus? Does this make the financial services area, which is known for innovation, does it make it that beast, the capital markets, which Henrik, you did a great job explaining, does it make them less, if you will, interested in innovating? I mean, are the regulators going to say, no, just pucker, because you said back to basics. Now, does that mean, there's no spread, there's no money in this stuff?
Larry, a couple years ago when NMS was just coming in, you made a comment, I think in Wall Street and Tech, saying that the professionals were big boys and they didn't need protection from each other. And there ought to be a division between protecting the professional market players and protecting the consumers. The consumers have gotten really screwed over this, from councils in England that invested in Iceland. Do you want to talk a little bit about how protection should be drawn and the professionals screwed up among themselves, AIG and its counterparties. Are there lessons to be learned in how to regulate this better?
That's a really good question. Certainly capital. I think people are trying to push all this stuff on exchanges and think that just by putting everything on an exchange, everything is going to be good. That's my most latest tirades I'm writing about, is that just by putting stuff on an exchange doesn't make it safe. It's the back end, it's the clearing, it's the settlement, it's capital. That AIG went bankrupt because there was absolutely no capital behind because it has a AAA credit rating it had AAA credit rating. It didn't need margin for all of the credit default swaps it issued, and when it went bankrupt, guess what? They got a phone. Actually, a friend of mine was the guy who got the call. He got a phone call. Hey guys, you got to put up $8 billion tomorrow. Okay, I got 27 cents, so there needs to be capital behind a lot of this stuff. Even if you can't centrally clear it, there needs to be capital behind a lot of this stuff, more reserves.
So that means you can be stupid, but you have to be rich and stupid.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Okay.
So that enough capital so that if you fail, that it doesn't bring the whole global ecosystem down.
And I think the biggest kind of mistake that has happened in this whole thing is that we didn't actually let a few of the really, really large banks fail, right? As an example,
that would have been terrible. That would have been really, really
and the only reason we couldn't do that is because of the impact that it would have had if a AIG or if a Citibank had actually gone under. I mean, there are urban legends of people flying over from Goldman Sachs and then 3 hours after this meeting happened with the Goldman execs, AIG was bailed out, right? Because trust me, if AIG had gone, it would have taken the rest of the financial market down with it. So it shows the intricacy that exists inside the market, and that is absolutely a problem, right? And that problem persisted even way before we had the complex financial products that were created, right? So that problem needs to somehow get resolved. And the central kind of clearing house that we are talking about for some of these products actually helps with that. Why? Because then it doesn't expose me as Citigroup directly to JP Morgan Chase. What it does is it exposes me to a central clearinghouse. So if I go down, I don't take Citigroup down with me, right? All that happens is my risk is essentially spread amongst 50, 60, 100 other participants of that central clearinghouse. So that's a good thing, as far as I'm concerned, that's happening.
As long as the clearinghouse is
adequately capitalized, yes, absolutely.
And to get to Thornton's question, I guess, and Larry's question in regard to is innovation a bad thing necessarily in this space. I don't think so. I mean, I think you could probably rewind the tape and say if we did certain other things with the same innovative type technologies we had, could things have played out better? The answer is probably yes, right? You know, and you think about even some of the problems with AIG, if those risks were more transparent to the marketplace as to what risks they were taking on, you wouldn't need necessarily other people to catch it. People would just be aware of it, and all the off-balance sheet stuff that exists today, all the derivatives that still people can't see, there's tremendous risk in all of these organizations. The reason why they said they couldn't let these organizations fail is nobody knew how much off-balance sheet existed between all of these firms, and nobody knew what the impact would be. But information could change that, so innovation could be helpful here, not just bad.
Any final comments from panelists? We're running up against our time. I'm just curious, how many people here own one of the very, very complex derivatives known as an adjustable rate mortgage? Those are one of the hardest, or at least were until the last 5 or 10 years, one of the hardest derivatives to model, because if interest rates drop, people would cash them, would turn them in and get to a fixed rate. And it's very hard to figure out the optionality in them. So it took a lot of complex runs through computer systems to try to model those things effectively. So they are actually fairly close to home sometimes. Any other questions from the audience while we have this distinguished panel up here? Thank you very much.